ready, John? John Knebel from Wheaton, Theosophical Society, will tell us more.
It is an honor, really, to be here this morning on HPB's birthday. We're going to have a cake later? To be among friends here in the Friends Center and talking about some serious business, but we can take ourselves pretty seriously sometimes. When I was thinking about this topic, these questions, the obvious dawned on me that the answer to the question, how do we live brotherhood, form a nucleus, practice healing, each of these questions is the answer to the others. How do we live brotherhood? We form a nucleus. We practice healing. How do we form a nucleus? We live brotherhood. We practice healing, and so on. But it's certainly not that simple. And we've heard so many quotes and technical details. Today, I'd like to do a little bit of a more simple presentation, just ideas. How do we live brotherhood? Although it could always be part of our personal path, our personal practice, our sadhana, to become more brotherly, brotherhood is a social experience, something we do together. An ascetic can practice being brotherly in his cave with the crickets and the wildflowers. He could while away the hours, conferring with the flowers, consulting with the rain. But we need others. We need friends in order to be practicing brotherhood. What would be some characteristic behaviors of somebody practicing or acting in a brotherly nature? Kind of a survey I want to do here. Living in a brotherly way with other people. People who need people. You remember the words of that song, Barbra Streisand? There's some interesting comments in there. We are children, needing other children, and yet letting a grown-up pride hide all the need inside, acting more like children than children. Anyway, what are some of the characteristic behaviors other than maturity or being spiritual grown-ups of one living in a brotherly way with others? First and foremost is respect. Everyone deserves our respect. Everyone is deserving of dignity. We should, anytime we look at another, don't look at the body, the personality, look at the Atma that is in each and every one. Another characteristic would be tolerance. I don't like the word tolerance. Tolerance sounds like something you have to do. You really don't want to like somebody, but you'll tolerate them. But yes, we need to suspend that judgment. We don't have to agree with others, but we cannot judge them. Another characteristic is listening, honestly listening to what others have to say. Most times people, when they hear the first couple words and then they start formulating their response, their rebuttal. What am I going to say? I already know what he's going to say. Another one is honestly caring about others. We talk about empathy, being empathetic. Amity, genuine friendliness. It's hard to be brotherly with an old curmudgeon. I'm an old curmudgeon sometimes, and it's difficult to feel a brotherliness when somebody is a curmudgeon. Encouragement. We need to be encouraging. Support. Defense. HPB talked about defense quite a bit. Defending others. Kindness. Courtesy. Your manners. This is starting to sound a little like the Boy Scout law, isn't it? Leadership. How do we, if you're going to be brotherly with others, show leadership in your relationships when you gather together. And one of my big ones is inspiration. Seek to inspire others, not necessarily by what you say, but what you do. And we'll get more into that here in a minute. Generosity, both spiritually and materially. Be generous with the teachings. These teachings aren't ours to hide away. We have to be a little judicious, but our job is to share them. And the big one, compassion, the ever-unfolding lotus flower. HPB tells us the first requisites for getting there are absolute unselfishness and unlimited devotion to the interests of others, and complete indifference as to the world and its opinions. To take the first step on this ideal path requires a perfectly pure motive. No frivolous thought must be allowed to divert our eyes from the goal. No hesitation, no doubt must fetter our feet. Don't take any time off. So how do we form a nucleus? And by the way, a side note here, it was mentioned a couple times, I think, is the nucleus or a nucleus? And I did do a little digging to see. The word nucleus first appeared in the Society's Objects in 1881. And prior to that we had aims, there was a plan, but by 1881 it was into a set of objects. I think there were 5 in 1881. And then it changed a few more times, and up through the revision in 1894, it was the nucleus. But then the final change in 1896 had a nucleus, and why? I don't know. I can't find an answer for that, but something changed in 1896, and it's been a nucleus ever since. But it's an interesting point to consider. Are we the nucleus, or are there many? The two common analogies that we hear about the biological, the nucleus of a cell, and also the analogy from physics, the nucleus of an atom, both describe a nucleus that is somewhat static in its nature. When we speak to others about the nucleus, we need to be careful that they do not imagine the nucleus to be a static, to be exclusive or elitist. We need to describe a nucleus that is expanding, growing, encompassing, inviting. A friend, a fellow student, recently wrote about this word. He said the word nucleus comes from the Latin, meaning kernel. It is the diminutive of nux, or nut. It constitutes the central or essential part of something around which all other parts are organized and brought together. It is the pith, the essence, the core, the gist. I like the idea of the nucleus being a nut or a seed, an acorn growing to become the mighty oak. Today, go outside and look at that mighty oak and see if you can find the acorn that was its seed. You won't find it. The acorn has been destroyed in the creation of that mighty oak. The nucleus has become the universal brotherhood. In the shelter business, I work at a shelter on Friday nights. We have a saying that our mission is to put ourselves out of business. If we could end homelessness in our community, there would be no need for a shelter. So the forming of a nucleus should only be the first step in putting ourselves out of business as a nucleus. In a wonderful world of universal brotherhood, there would be no need for a nucleus. And what a wonderful world that would be. What do we do? Here's a thought exercise. What do we do when a newcomer comes to our door? He had seen our flyer and now comes to our lodge meeting, curious about Theosophy. Perhaps he or she has told us that they had read a book by Alice Bailey or by Crowley. How do we react? Do we react in horror and say, no, you shouldn't read that book? Or do we welcome him, knowing that he is seeking the truth? Do we seek to include him, or do we push him away, saying, if you want to be part of our nucleus, you need to read Blavatsky, or Leadbeater, or Judge, or Perucker? Now, how can we expect to expand our nucleus by rejecting others? A master wrote, "Do not be too severe on the merits or demerits of one who seeks admission among your ranks." Now, I don't mean that we should start reading Bailey books in our lodge meetings. There are other places that one can do that. We must be careful not to let our efforts to expand this nucleus, to let our efforts dilute or water down these wonderful core teachings that we have discovered. We need to be ready to share those core teachings with the newcomer, just as someone shared them with us when we began seeking for the light. Perhaps we first discovered Theosophy after reading an Alice Bailey book, or an Edgar Cayce book, or Plato, or Nagarjuna. We were no different than the newcomer that comes to our door. So we must be welcoming. We must not frighten them away. Sometimes our big words can frighten them away. I recently saw an interesting quote from Henri Nouwen. He's a Dutch Roman Catholic priest. He said, "One of the main tasks of theology is to find words that do not divide, but unite, that do not create conflict, that do not hurt, but heal." Do not hurt, but heal. It's not an easy task, but it is one of the main challenges of Theosophy as well. How do we practice healing. In the Adyar tradition, there's a saying that there are 3 pillars of Theosophy: study, meditation, and service. I'm pretty sure this is from Annie Besant, but I haven't found the original source of that. But there it is. In those 3 pillars is service. I believe that along with our interaction with the newcomer, with the new young potential theosophists in our groups, the best way to practice healing in the world is to serve. The highest ideal of life is to serve. Whether we serve at a local homeless shelter or a food pantry, or at a shelter for homeless pets, or if we engage in peaceful, nonviolent protest against environmental destruction, or if we work to welcome immigrants or refugees into our community, or if we work to bring theosophy to those in prisons, these are all ways where, either as individuals or better in groups, our little nuclei, we can practice healing in this terribly troubled world of ours. Annie Besant, the second president of the Adyar Society, founded the Theosophical Order of Service as a separate sidebar organization, knowing the political nature of service. You'll always find people arguing about who should get your service and who shouldn't, who's deserving, who's not. So it always has a political aspect to it. Before she met HPB, she was well known as a social reformer. She was already notorious for standing up for the rights of women. Matchbook workers on strike. It's a wonderful story about Annie Besant. She was condemned for publishing a book with Charles Bradlaugh recommending birth control. Pretty political. She was wise to keep her society out of politics and politics out of the society. The TOS motto is a union of those who love in the service of all that suffers. Her Theosophical Order of Service still exists today and presents to us a wonderful opportunity for us to serve together, for people to serve together, to practice healing in the world. You may remember last year at the Santa Barbara ITC, Carol Ward did a presentation on the TOS. Remember that you do not need to be a member of the Theosophical Society or the Theosophical Society Adyar, either America or Adyar, to be a member of the TOS. Many TOS members bring friends and family members, others to participate with them in little TOS service projects. All are welcome. I have a message here from Ananya Sriram Rajan. She's the current president of the TOS in America. She writes to us, "Dear brothers and sisters, in keeping with the theme of this conference, a nucleus of universal brotherhood, a world's healing force, I'd like to extend a warm invitation to all of you to use the platform of the Theosophical Order of Service as a way to create a nucleus in your own community and a nucleus within our different theosophical schools. The Mahachohan stated that truth holds qualities of benevolence, philanthropy, and reform, the foundation of the TOS's work to be a healing force in today's world. The TOS is open to anyone from any walk of life, member or non-member of a theosophical organization. What matters more than anything is the desire to lift a little of the heavy karma of the world. Our conferences are wonderful, but we must take our wisdom out into the world through altruistic actions, thus following the mandate of the Mahachohan and the Masters of the Wisdom. I wish you all a wonderful experience at this 2017 ITC conference. Warm fraternal greetings to all. When we go out into the world to serve our fellow man, the animals, the other kingdoms, people notice. Not everyone, but people notice. Perhaps they are inspired. Without saying a word about Theosophy, we are making Theosophy a living power in our lives and a living power in the world. We become the world's healing force. We are expanding our nucleus by setting the example for others, inspiring them to join us. We are growing the mighty oak tree of brotherhood. The world's healing force is, in a word, altruism. I want to close and repeat a quote that Helena had up here a moment ago. It's at the end of her wonderful article, which I recommend everyone to read, "Let every man prove his own work." At the end of that article, there's a note from her master who says, "He who does not practice altruism, he who is not prepared to share his last morsel with a weaker or poorer than himself, he who neglects to help his brother man of whatever race, nation, or creed, whenever and wherever he meets suffering, and who turns a deaf ear to the cry of human misery, he who hears an innocent person slandered or abused," throw that in, "whether a brother theosophist or not, and does not undertake his defense as he would undertake his own, is no theosophist." Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you, John, so much.